Aneurin Bevan on the Suez Crisis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Carl Manchester 2008. Speech given by Aneurin Bevan to the UK House of Commons, 5th of December 1956. The speech to which we have just listened is the last of a long succession that the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, has made to the House in the last few months, and, if I may be allowed to say so, I congratulate him upon having survived so far. He appears to be in possession of vigorous health, which is obviously not enjoyed by all his colleagues, and he appears to be exempted from those Freudian lapses which have distinguished the speeches of the Lord Privy Seal, and therefore he has survived so far with complete vigour. However, I am bound to say that the speech by the Right Honourable Gentleman today carries the least conviction of all. I have been looking through the various objectives and reasons that the government have given to the House of Commons for making war on Egypt, and it really is desirable that when a nation makes war upon another nation, it should be quite clear why it does so. It should not keep changing the reasons as time goes on. There is, in fact, no correspondence whatever between the reasons given today and the reasons set out by the Prime Minister at the beginning. The reasons have changed all the time. I have got a list of them here, and for the sake of the record, I propose to read it. I admit that I found some difficulty in organising a speech with any coherence because of the incoherence of the reasons. They are very varied. On the 30th of October, the Prime Minister said that the purpose was first to seek to separate the combatants, and second, to remove the risk to free passage through the canal. The speech we have heard today is the first speech in which that subject has been dropped. Every other statement made on the matter since the beginning has always contained a reference to the future of the canal as one of Her Majesty's Government's objectives. In fact, as an object of war, to coerce Egypt. Indeed, that is exactly what Honourable and Right Honourable Gentlemen opposite believed it was all about. Honourable members do not do themselves justice. One does not fire in order merely to have a ceasefire. One would have thought that the ceasefire was consequent upon having fired in the first place. It could have been accomplished without starting. The other objective set out on the 30th of October was to reduce the risk to those voyaging through the canal. We have heard from the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman today a statement which I am quite certain all the world will read with astonishment. He has said that when we landed in Port Said, there was already every reason to believe that both Egypt and Israel had agreed to cease fire. The Minister shakes his head. If he will recollect what his Right Honourable and Learned friend said, it was that there was still a doubt about the Israeli reply. Are we really now telling this country and the world that all these calamitous consequences have been brought down upon us merely because of a doubt? That is what he said. Surely there was no need. We had, of course, done the bombing, but our ships were still going through the Mediterranean. We had not arrived at Port Said. The exertions of the United Nations had already gone far enough to be able to secure from Israel and Egypt a promise to cease fire, and all that remained to be cleared up was an ambiguity about the Israeli reply. In these conditions, and against the background of these events, the invasion of Egypt still continued. In the history of nations there is no example of such frivolity. When I have looked at this chronicle of events during the last few days with every desire in the world to understand it, I just have not been able to understand, and do not yet understand, the mentality of the government. If the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman wishes to deny what I have said, I will give him a chance of doing so. If his words remain as they are now, we are telling the nation and the world that, having decided upon the course, we went on with it despite the fact that the objective we had set ourselves had already been achieved, namely, the separation of the combatants. As to the objective of removing the risk to free passage through the canal, I must confess that I have been astonished at this also. We sent an ultimatum to Egypt, by which we told her that unless she agreed to our landing Ismailia, Suez, and Port Said, we should make war upon her. We knew very well, did we not, that Nasser could not possibly comply? Did we really believe that Nasser was going to give in at once? Is our information from Egypt so bad that we did not know that an ultimatum of that sort was bound to consolidate his position in Egypt and in the whole Arab world? We knew at the time, on the 29th and the 30th of October, that long before we could have occupied Port Said, Ismailia, and Suez, Nasser would have been in a position to make his riposte. So wonderfully organized was this expedition, which apparently has been a miracle of military genius, that long after we had delivered our ultimatum and bombed Port Said, our ships were still ploughing through the Mediterranean, leaving the enemy still in possession of all the main objectives which we said we wanted. Did we really believe that Nasser was going to wait for us to arrive? He did what anybody would have thought he would do, and if the government did not think he would do it, on that account alone they ought to resign. He sank ships in the canal, the wicked man. What did honourable gentlemen opposite expect him to do? The result is that, in fact, the first objective realised was the opposite of the one we set out to achieve. The canal was blocked, and it is still blocked. The only other interpretation of the government's mind is that they expected, for some reason or other, that their ultimatum would bring about disorder in Egypt and the collapse of the Nasser regime. None of us believed that. If honourable gentlemen opposite would only reason about other people as they reason amongst themselves, they would realise that a government cannot possibly surrender to a threat of that sort and keep any self-respect. We should not, should we? If somebody held a pistol at our heads and said, "You do this or we fire," should we? Of course not. Why on earth do not honourable members opposite sometimes believe that other people have the same courage and independence as they themselves possess? Nasser behaved exactly as any reasonable man would expect him to behave. The other objective was to reduce the risk to those voyaging through the canal. That was a rhetorical statement, and one does not know what it means. I am sorry the Right Honourable Gentleman the Prime Minister is not here. I appreciate why he is not here, but it is very hard to reply to him when he is not in the House, and I hope honourable members opposite will acquit me of trying to attack him in his absence. On the 31st of October, the Prime Minister said that our objective was to secure a lasting settlement and to protect our nationals. What do we think of that? In the meantime, our nationals were living in Egypt while we were murdering Egyptians at Port Said. We left our nationals in Egypt at the mercy of what might have been merciless riots throughout the whole country, with no possibility whatever of our coming to their help. We were still voyaging through the Mediterranean, after having exposed them to risk by our own behaviour. What does the House believe that the country will think when it really comes to understand all this? On the 1st of November, we were told the reason was to stop hostilities and prevent a resumption of them. But hostilities had already been practically stopped. On the 3rd of November, our objectives became much more ambitious: to deal with all the outstanding problems in the Middle East. In the famous book Madame Bovary, there is a story of a woman who goes from one sin to another, a long story of moral decline. In this case, our ambitions soar the farther away we are from realizing them. Our objective was to deal with all the outstanding problems in the Middle East. After having outraged our friends, after having insulted the United States, after having affronted all our friends in the Commonwealth, after having driven the whole of the Arab world into one solid phalanx, at least for the moment, behind Nasser, we were then going to deal with all the outstanding problems in the Middle East. The next objective of which we were told was to ensure that the Israeli forces withdrew from Egyptian territory.